Here is a case of a small Aussie company that faces ruin as a result of a pretty vicious action by an American multinational suing this company for using the word UGG. It is outrageous. The word UGG is a noun, it's not a brand name as such. So if I can just introduce you in a moment to Eddie Ortega, to Michael Teixeira, and also Aidan Dalglish, who's my New South Wales Senate candidate for the next Xenofontaine. Aidan's been working with Eddie on this issue and will continue to work with him here on the ground in Sydney. But the big issue here is this. This is an absolute outrage that an Australian company is facing a legal action in the US for using the name UGG is a disgrace. Deckers should be ashamed of themselves for bringing this action in the District Court of Illinois. This really is a global version, this really is a real-life global version of the castle. This is a little Aussie battler who employs 9 people here directly, another 30 other people have work as a result of the 50,000 UGG boots he makes each year, being taken to court by a $2.4 billion American gorilla of a company that is using illegal action this way. One of the reasons this legal action has been brought is because of free trade agreements, where the free trade agreement did not exempt UGG from the agreement in terms of protecting it as an Australian name. This is not just about this company, this is about every Australian company that's been making UGG boots for over 40 years. Eddie's been making them here for over a quarter of a century, and what you see here is Australian made. Australian workers, Australian sheepskin, Australian products made by Australians with pride, which is a first-class product, and we'll show you what the competition is in just a moment. So the big issue here is that this is a big deal. This means if this case succeeds, it will shut down the Australian UGG boot industry. This is as outrageous as an Australian company trademarking the name apple pie and then suing American businesses for using or selling apple pies. That's how bad this is, and this is an abuse of trademark laws in my view and the view of others. What's at stake here is the future of UGG boots. What's at stake here is the future of UGG boots being made in Australia, and with it potentially thousands of jobs. Because if this industry is allowed to export UGG boots to the rest of the world without threat of legal action, there could be potentially many hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs being created in this country. So that's why I'm calling on the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, to do the right thing, to stand up for Australian jobs, for Australian industry, for the name UGG. And what needs to happen here is for the Australian government to make representations to the US to say that the name UGG is one that cannot be trademarked by an American company or any other company. This is a generic name that needs to be saved. If the French can protect the name champagne, the Spanish the word sherry, the Portuguese the word port, and the Greeks the word feta, then surely Australia can protect the word UGG from this sort of legal action that can destroy Australian companies. I might hand it over to Eddie and we'll hear from his lawyer Michael in a moment. Just look at the camera and talk. Are you nervous?
It's not just nervous. I'd like to employ a lot more people than what we have now. I'd like to export. I'd like to have a fair go selling Australian-made products all over the world. So I really need the public support, and most of all, I need the federal government support on this. So let's all get together and fight these giants, because they're trying to ruin the UGG boot industry, where we can create more jobs, inject more money into our economy. Basically, we need the UGG back into Australian economy.
What's it going to cost you? How much is the court case going to cost you?
The court case is going to cost me, it's a ridiculous amount for a small company like ours. It's going to cost me a vicinity of $500,000 Australian dollars.
Michael, do you want to explain the three orders being sought?
So yeah, they're seeking a wide range of orders, Deckers. They commenced the litigation against Eddie without any forewarning. It just happened out of the blue. And actually what they've sought is they've sought an order preventing Eddie from selling UGG boots. You know, there's no territorial restriction, so effectively he can't sell UGG boots anywhere in the world. They're also seeking punitive damages, treble damages for all the money that they claim to have lost. They're seeking orders that all the product you see behind you here is delivered up to Deckers for destruction, and also all the bank accounts that he has are frozen, and all the proceeds from his bank accounts get sent across to Deckers. So quite extreme orders are being sought, and I think it's fair to say that if Deckers is successful in getting all those orders, Eddie will be out of business. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and so this is true. I mean, this is do or die for a small Australian business, but also for every Australian business that wants to make UGG boots. There are many other businesses. If Eddie falls over, it's the end of the Australian UGG boot industry. UGG belongs to Australia. It doesn't belong to a corporation in the US, which can legally bully this company into submission. That's why Eddie's fighting this, and that's why the government of Australia needs to stand up for an Australian small business, but also for an iconic Australian name. We're happy to take your questions.
Nick, is it your fear if this is successful, this is one of the smaller operators, you'd say, if this is successful, they'll go after the bigger
Look, I have no doubt you've got this gorilla of a company. You've got an American multinational with sales of $2.4 billion a year that is basically trying to shut down the small business. They're trying to pick Eddie off. They're trying to find a small supplier in order to shut them down as an example to other manufacturers. So that's what it's about. I mean, this is do or die for the future of the Australian UGG boot industry in this country. And by way of contrast, if we can just to show what his UGG is. This is the competitors. This is Deckers. It says UGG Australia. This is what Deckers sells. And
There's nothing Australian about it.
let me just show you this. This is the material. And the boot here, it's got at the back of it, UGG Australia. And then you have to look very closely inside, in tiny writing, it says made in China. UGG Australia, the brand, is made in China, and these guys are trying to shut down an Australian business that makes UGG boots right here in Australia. I reckon that's pretty disgusting.
Not even Australian sheepskin.
How did we end up in a position where this word UGG, which is part of our vernacular, ended up being trademarked?
This is trademark law. I mean, this is the problem with these free trade agreements. If we sign the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we'll actually be worse off. You'll see more and more of these disputes picking off small Australian businesses using trademark laws that I think are an abusive process. So this really is a case of trademark laws gone crazy, and UGG is something that should never be trademarked. I mean, it's as silly, this is as crazy as an Australian company trademarking the name apple pie and then suing anyone in America that dares to sell an apple pie. The Americans wouldn't stand for it. The Australian government should stand for this either. Any questions of Michael or Eddie? I mean, it'll shut down his business basically. How many years have you been doing this business for?
Well, I've been in the leather industry since 1980. We were exporting hides and skins at first, then we got into leather garments. And in the early 90s, we started making UGG boots. And
Before Deckers bought the Australian company.
I think so, yeah. But I didn't worry about who the Deckers is. We didn't know. It was a generic term in Australia. UGG boots are UGG boots. We used to sell them to little ladies who used to sell them at the markets. Then we used to sell them, through people walking in or people going overseas. We used to just make UGG boots, me and Uncle Doug here. We have the oldest UGG boot makers in Australia. I mean, practically, if we go one by one, all the other manufacturers have to close down. If we can't export, if we can't bring the money back into Australia, practically it's just a dying industry. And we don't want that to happen. We want to create jobs. We want all the proceeds to come back into Australia as the raw product is Australian. We just want a fair go. That's all.
And tell us, Eddie, are you allowed to use the word UGG in Australia?
Yes.
Is this the international market?
Well, they're suing me for that. I don't know why they're doing that. I could use it in Australia, but I can't export. How come? Hang on. If it's generic in Australia, why can't I export the product I made? People want it. I mean, consumer wants it. I'm not deceiving anybody by selling UGG Australia and being an American company and made in China.
Not using Australian sheepskin.
Yeah, and I'm using Australian merinos.
They're using American.
And tell us.
But he's being sued, just to make it clear,
Yeah.
this court action is so sweeping, he is being sued for even selling Ugg boots here in Australia. He's been a multi-million dollar claim of punitive damages made against him for the shoes to be burnt, for the Ugg boots to be burnt, and for his bank accounts to be frozen. I mean, really, is this what trade agreements have led us to? This should have been carved out. The people that negotiated the Australia-America Free Trade Agreement a number of years ago didn't do a very good job if someone like Eddie is exposed to this sort of draconian legal action.
And Eddie, tell us, court is expensive. Can you even afford to fight these?
Well, I'm going to fight them as much as I can. I mean, I'm going to, even if I have to put a placard and go in front of their office in California, I'm willing to do that. Because it's not fair what they're doing. They're being a total bully. And it's not only me in the past, there are other manufacturers who had to close down. There are other manufacturers, practically they made them sign special disclosures so they don't tell them, you know, or tell the public what their court case had been. And just look, practically, we need the Ugg back to Australia.
And in the meantime, what should consumers do who are looking to buy a pair of Ugg boots?
They should look for the
Labeling.
green and gold. I'll show you. What they should be looking for is the green and gold, Australian made, Australian made. They should ask, don't get fooled by 100% Australian sheepskin. Make sure it says Australian made
The green and gold.
and the green and gold.
Any other questions? You've been very quiet today.
I'm done.
You're done. Okay.
I think we're all in shock by this Deca 110 gorilla coming in and trying to
Yeah.
stomp
Maybe,
up already.
Maybe it's,
Facebook.
yeah, I mean, maybe
this-
just describe to us, you know, in Australia, an Ugg boot is a descriptive word, but they're trying to say it's a brand.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
mean,
crux of it,
th-
isn't it?
I mean, this is insane. You have a term Ugg that everybody knows is a quintessentially Australian term. It's a noun. It describes a type of boot. It's not a brand. And you have this big American gorilla of a multinational trying to shut this small business down by suing him in an American court and asking for all his boots to be destroyed, to be burnt, asking for multi-million dollars in damages, and asking for all his bank accounts to be frozen. I mean, fair dinkum, this is the sort of thing that if the Australian government is going to stand up for Australian interests, they actually need to say, we need this to be exempted under the Australia-America Free Trade Agreement. Otherwise, there'll be no hope for people like Eddie and all the other businesses like his around the country.
Maybe just add on to the legal question.
Sorry.
In 1986,
Just look at
sorry.
it in that, yeah.
In 1986, an Australian individual applied for the Ugg boot name in America, and in the application the person made, they had to tell the US Patent and Trademark Office whether the name had any industry meaning. In other words, was it a word to describe a product, or was it a word that the person invented themselves? And we have documentation that showed that they told the US Patent and Trademark Office that it had no industry significance. So as a result of that, the patent was granted in America. There was the trademark was granted in America. There was nobody there to oppose it. And since then, Deckers has gone around the world and registered the trademark in 120 different countries around the world. The only place that they failed to register the trademark is in Australia and New Zealand, because the industry, Eddie and other people, got together to fight that and prevented that from occurring. But now any time anybody exports from Australia, Deckers will sue them in that other jurisdiction because of their local trademark right. And it's all a problem because there's nobody there when they apply for a trademark in the Netherlands or in Germany to stand up and say, you can't use that term. So I guess by stealth, they've acquired the trademark in almost every country in the world except Australia and New Zealand.
It's pretty interesting fact. And Ada, who's a cattle farmer out of the Snowy Mountains, your wife has Ugg boots.
My wife does have Ugg boots. They're Australian Ugg boots.
Yeah.
So I am from the Monero region in southern New South Wales, and a lot of the community where I am are Monero farmers with merino sheep. And the Monero merino is well known around the world for one of the best wool and hide sheep in the world. And Eddie has been buying Monero merino sheepskin for what, Eddie, 30 years?
More.
So Eddie
About
doesn't
35
just,
years.
doesn't just support his own employees, he doesn't just support those who work in direct conjunction with his business, but also probably hundreds of farmers across my area also rely upon these upstream businesses for their income. So this is really deeply in the Australian psyche. The ugboot, the sheep. It's a real Australian story, and like Nick said before, it's like a caster story. You know, this is not a good vibe.
And Adrian, do you think the Australian government should pull back from signing the Trans-Pacific Partnership and maybe renegotiate or offer amendments to that free trade agreement?
Well, I would question whether or not the Australian people actually understand what our negotiators are signing us up for in the TPP. Even people like myself who have made an effort to understand it fully think that it's a lot less about trade and a lot more about shoring up corporate interests and about allowing foreign nationals to attack our sovereignty.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time, and these are very comfortable ugboots.
Glad you like them.
Very
Glad you liked them, Nick.
Oh, they-
They're made right here in Australia.
And
Nothing
Aidan's
misleading
made
about it.
He's elected to the Senate. He'll be wearing ugboots in one of the Senate sessions, and we'll wear them together.
The winter session, maybe.
Oh, maybe
the winter session.
Okay. All right. Brian, Mr. Seaver, you're uncharacteristically quiet today. It's not like you.
Well, yeah. I'm learning.
He's learning.